We'd like to invite everyone to please settle down as we will begin our program in a short while. Thank you. The Honorable Ambassador Delia Domingo Albert, former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues in government and academe, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Arian Kirsty de Guzman, and I have the honor of being your moderator for today's Mabini Dialogue. The Foreign Service Institute, in celebration of National Women's Month, welcomes you all to today's Mabini Dialogue on the Philippines at the Forefront, Championing Gender and Development. We would also like to welcome our guests from all over the world who are joining us via Facebook live stream. Today's Mabini Dialogue seeks to discuss how the Philippine leadership and involvement in gender and development initiatives reflect behavioral patterns of middle powers. This dialogue will explore how the Philippines can continue to use its position through niche diplomacy to promote the gender and development agenda in the international arena. Today, we are honored to have one of the most prominent figures in Philippine diplomacy to discuss how the Philippines have been at the forefront of championing gender and development on the global stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce our distinguished speaker for today's Mabini Dialogue. Ambassador Delia Domingo Albert is the first woman career diplomat to become Secretary of Foreign Affairs in Southeast Asia. She has represented the Philippines in Switzerland, Romania, Hungary, the Federal Republic of Germany, and the Commonwealth of Australia. As chair of the United Nations Security Council in 2004, she introduced the agenda, The Role of Civil Society in Post-Conflict Peacebuilding, highlighting the role of women as peacemakers. She attended the University of the Philippines, the Institute of International Studies in Geneva, the Diplomatic Institute in Salzburg, Boston University overseas in Bonn, the J.F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, among others. The Philippine Women's University conferred on her Doctor of Humanities honoris causa for building a gender-fair society and was awarded Most Distinguished Alumna of the University of the Philippines in 2012. In 1994, she was conferred the Presidential Order of Sikatuna with the rank of Datu for her meritorious and exceptional service to the country. In 2004, she was given the title of Bay Arawatun sa Pilipinas for assisting Muslim women in their search for peace and development. In 2019, she was conferred with the Order of the Rising Sun Gold and Silver Star by the government of Japan. Ambassador Albert is a member of the advisory board of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy in Berlin and the Global Summit of Women. She is the founding chair of Business and Professional Women Philippines, Diwata Women in Resource Development, ASEAN Society Philippines, advisor to the Filipino CEO Circle, member of the Board of Trustees of the Ramon Magsaysay Awards Foundation, and the author of Women in Diplomacy, the Remarkable Ambassadors in the Philippine Foreign Service. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let us all give a warm round of applause, Ambassador Delia Domingo Albert.
Good morning. I'm afraid you will not see my face if I stood there. So I decided I should be more comfortable here. If it's all right with you, then you can see me better. That's one of the advantages of being this height. Anyway, good morning, everybody. Sorry to be 1 minute late or 2 minutes late. I was stuck in the traffic, and it's honestly being stuck in the traffic. But nonetheless, I first would like to open this by honoring the women of Marawi. In their honor, I'm wearing a Marawi costume, Marawi material, because, as you heard earlier, I became a princess of the Marawi area for bringing the Southern women into the national, regional, and global conversations on women. And I didn't know that they took note of this and awarded me the title of, as you heard, Bay Arawatun in Pilipinas. Perhaps you can ask the translation from our colleagues from the South. Can anyone translate that? I'll do that at the end. Gives you an element of suspense. Anyway, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and friends, I'm delighted to be back in the Department of Foreign Affairs, which has been my home for more than 44 years of my natural life. And I'm always glad to be with the FSI. I believe that they're doing a fantastic job for training our diplomats and sharing what diplomacy is about with other schools, I believe, in the country. For this reason, I'd like to thank them for inviting me to this session on the Mabini Dialogue series. As a dialogue, I think it should be a conversation between individuals and among individuals. And I think the topic is quite interesting. It's a statement that they made. The theme is the Philippines at the forefront, ... championing gender and development. However, if it is a dialogue, perhaps I will turn around the statement into a question. Is the Philippines at the forefront of championing gender and development? In the course of my short presentation, and I'd like you to participate later on in this dialogue, I will give you a few basic information on the subject that has been chosen by the Foreign Service Institute. How many of you think that the Philippines is in the forefront of championing gender and development? I don't see the hands. Don't be shy. Who doubt it? How many have no idea where we are? What happened to the rest? Anyway, to help us in this discussion, I'd like to look at some of the studies that have been made on gender and development in the Philippines. And perhaps I can divide this conversation into 4 parts. The first part would be on gender gap. Second would be on gender equality. The third would be on barriers to gender equality. And the fourth would be, what do we do about it? So on gender gap, how many of you are following the report of the World Economic Forum on the Gender Gap Index? I encourage you after this to Google. You will be very happy and pleased to see that the Philippines has been in the forefront as far as the World Economic Forum Gender Gap Index is concerned. Why? The index measures the performance of the Philippines in addressing gender equality. So it's a study what are our achievements? What have we done about gender equality? So that, to me, is the basis of the study of the World Economic Forum. As early as 2006, when the study was first made and released, I was ambassador to Germany. And I was pleasantly surprised to be invited to speak on gender in the Philippines. I said, oh, why? And they said, because the Philippines was, in 2006, the only country among the top 10 countries that has narrowed the gender gap. Can anyone tell me which number we are in the top 10? Any wise guess? Number 6. Can you imagine? That's why you have to go and read that index. Makes you feel better. Can you imagine? We were the only Asian country in the top 10 of the gender gap index of the World Economic Forum. When the World Economic Forum came to Manila, I was again asked to chair the discussion on gender and development, because at that time we were still in the top 10. Sadly, we went down, and you have to put the context. Why did we go down below 10? We became number 12, number 14, number 16, and in 2021, we became number 19. Can you relate that to the situation in the Philippines at the time? Who was leading the Philippines at that time? And you relate it to the index. I won't name names. It's not, diplomats are not supposed to name sources. We're not supposed to name names. But anyway, we went down as low as number 19. However, in 2023, something very exciting happened. We regained a few notches up. Now we are number, anyone tell me? From 19, from 6 to below 10, to 19, to number 16. So we are in number 16. What was the basis for what is the criteria used by the World Economic Forum? One, our political situation, political leadership. Second is our economic participation, women participation in the economy. Third is the state of health, and the fourth is the state of education. We have gone down in some of these criteria, but we seem to keep well in the economic because of some improvements in the participation of women in the economy. Yesterday, I don't know if you read the papers, that Philippine women managers top the ranking in Asia. That's what happens when you follow the gender agenda. Any news that comes about statistics on the Philippines, you follow it. Anyway, let's put aside gender gap index. Now let's go to gender equality. While the Philippines ranked very well in the Global Gender Gap Index, the studies of the United Nations and the Philippine Institute for Development Studies tell you a very different picture. Why? They don't look at the achievements, rather than they identify areas for improvement. So that's one side, the Gender Gap Index, and on the other side, you have the gender equality conversation. Both the United Nations studies and the PIDS, Philippine Institute of Development Studies, state that the Philippines has still a lot of work to do in gender equality. Last week, those of you who are following the gender agenda, I was struck by a comment by the United Nations representative of the Fund for Population Activities. She said, this is quoting her, that the Philippines, quote, still has a long way to go in achieving the goal for gender equality. She added something that really struck me, and she said, why is this so? In the Philippines, she said, it is about dismantling the power structure that perpetuates gender inequality. That's a loaded statement. And if you think about it, she said, the debate is about dismantling the power structure that perpetuate gender equality. Why did the UN and the PIDS, Philippine Institute for Development Studies, say that the Philippines still has a long way to go? Statistics in their studies show that the Philippines still lags behind women participation, particularly in the labor force, with the gender gap at 28%, has been going down a little bit, but very slowly since 2015. The gap is more pronounced from women with less education, as well as women with low background. Only 36% of women with less education get employed. Those who did not finish grade school. Those who finish elementary school get employed with about 48%. So you have those with very little education, it's only 36%. Those with elementary get 48%. And 44% of women high school graduates actually get a job. So you can imagine why the UN says that there has to be done in terms of the employment or engagement of women in the labor force. This was very interesting for me because wherever you go around the world and you meet women, Filipino women, they're mostly women household keepers, household domestic workers. So you wonder, why are the statistics so low? So perhaps the UN should also study the number of women who are going abroad. And I think the Department of Foreign Affairs would know how many million women, Filipino women, are abroad. Anyone from DFA? How many are in ASEAN? How many are in the Middle East? How many are in Europe? I think this is something for the regional sections in the DFA to get to know about. We note that this disparity in terms of women versus men, I didn't give you the statistics for men. I'm more interested in the women. There is something that is worth looking into, which means that women are less being sent to school. So to me, that would be the indication that less women actually go to school at that level. But when you go to universities and professionals, it's a different story. So I always say the gap in this country is not perhaps that kind of gap, but it's the gap between women who have it all, who have professions, have good jobs, and the women who have nothing or less. So if you look statistically, this is what you can get. That's been my message for some time, and I hope we're able to address some of these issues. Now let me look at the barriers why the women are less engaged in the labor force. And this is a study of the PIDS. This is a Philippine study. Number one, what is the number one barrier? Perhaps you don't feel it in the DFA, but the number one that they have identified is discrimination. Pete says that the workplace discrimination in the Philippines due to gender still exists. This happens when female applicants are denied or are terminated because of their gender or maternity. Does that happen in the DFA? Anybody has a complaint? You better raise your hand now if you feel discriminated. We have certain discriminatory practices, but maternity? Who has been denied a maternity leave? You're all a very good audience. Nothing's happening. While this type of discrimination seems to be decreasing, there still exists unconscious bias against women that keep them from accessing opportunities for career advancement. Do you believe that? I see some heads nodding. Speak up when you can later on. Workplace discrimination can also be manifested in other ways, such as performance valuation. You know what I mean? And that the Philippines still, according to this study, place a premium on masculine characteristics. Anyway, these are studies, they have numbers to prove it. The second barrier after discrimination is harassment. Recently, I think the whole week last week, articles cite that sexual harassment remains to be one of the most underreported crimes against women in the Philippines. Social attitudes towards sexual harassment are attributed to underreporting by the victims themselves. The cost of harassment to employers include low productivity, impaired judgment, lack of trust and teamwork, loss of employees, negative corporate image, and discrimination within the company. I'm with the private sector now, and I'm very proud to say that in SGV, we have 60-40 partners, 60 women, 40 men on the managerial level. And so I raised the flag of SGV. Perhaps this is a conscious policy within our global partner, which is Ernst & Young, about inclusion, diversity in the workplace. So I can give you a link to our studies on women in the workforce globally in terms of the work being done by a company like Ernst & Young. The third barrier is gender pay gap. The ILO estimates that women worldwide earn 23% less compared to what men earn. It also cites the following factors to the gender pay gap. Number one, women have additional unpaid care work. There's a lot being said about that. We have stringent work arrangements. There is undervaluation of feminine work. There's underrepresentation of women in leadership and decision-making positions. This is one of the reasons we fell in the gender gap index. I remember when I was a member of cabinet, we were nearly 40-60, 40 women, 60 men. But the major departments were women: finance, foreign affairs, DNR, agriculture, whatever. Today, how many women are in cabinet? Anyway, I think DFA, you should know your statistics. Data is power, you know. If you don't have data, don't dare to negotiate, because that is your biggest asset if you have data in your hands. In the Philippines, gender pay gap still exists in such industries as science and engineering, health, and ICT. Women professionals earn 8.5% less on average in the Philippines. This is alarming because it is estimated that 51% of technicians and associate professors in the Philippines are women. The fourth barrier is barriers to women entrepreneurship. So you have discrimination, you have, what's the second one? Harassment. The third is gender pay gap, and the fourth is barrier to women entrepreneurship. The World Bank reports that globally, women own over a third of all formal businesses. However, women-owned businesses tend to be micro and small enterprises in sectors and markets with minimum or no growth. They get stuck. As such, they have limited access to credit. The McKinsey report, which has an extensive report on the Philippines, reports that the Philippines has achieved gender parity in financial inclusion. What do you mean by financial inclusion? It's in terms of owning a bank account or the use of formal financial products. Quite high in the Philippines. However, the level of financial inclusion, both for men and women in the Philippines, remains low compared to other countries in the region. I have always tried to ask institutions to do a dashboard comparison of all this data on the Philippines in terms of our participation in ASEAN, in APEC, Indo-Pacific, in the UN, in terms of our dealings with ASEAN and EU. It's always good to have such a dashboard, so at a glance, you know where you are, you know, so you can situate yourself, and that can influence your language, that can influence your body language, when you can be more assertive, or you can be more convincing. I strongly recommend our diplomats to be very conscious of data and a dashboard comparatively. You cannot say we are the best when somebody else is better than you. But you can say, well, we may not be the best, but we can catch up with so-and-so. And I think that's one way to get moving. And as someone said, the problem perhaps in the Philippines is that we tend to be insular-minded. We are an archipelago. We try to look at ourselves within those 7,000 islands and think the Philippines has played a very important role. And I would like, at this point, to recognize somebody in this audience, the person who initiated the first working draft of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Ambassador Mina Falcon. I always have this in my speeches all over the world. People forget that the Philippines initiated that first working draft, which has become the Bill of Rights for Women, not just in the Philippines, but around the world. And I think all of you, if I were secretary, I will insist, I will give you an exam on the 30 articles of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Just a little story. Ambassador Shahani, who was then Assistant Secretary for the UN office in DFA, was the rapporteur of the Commission on Women in the UN. And she was given the task to submit the first working draft for the convention in the early 70s. Now, this is really, to me, the document for every woman to read. It will make you realize who you are, what you can do about yourself. And I strongly suggest you read it. And why? Because it is a comprehensive study of human rights law that seeks to eliminate discrimination through the recognition, protection, fulfillment, and promotion of the rights of women. To date, 189 countries have ratified the convention. One superpower has not. Do you know who has not ratified the convention? I don't hear anything. Anyone who can speak with authority? Yes, who said that? Thank you. Anyway, does anyone know when the Philippines ratified the convention? Aha. We ratified it in July 1980. For that reason, I rushed to get married that year while the convention was not being questioned, because the final ratification came in 1981. So July, we ratified it. Some of you may know my story. For 3 years, I tried to get married, but the DFA would not allow me to marry the man I wanted to marry because they wanted me to resign, like all the others. And I thought it was injustice, and I waited for the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women to be my weapon. It's weaponizing a convention for your human rights. Today, anybody from HRMO? Today, more than 30 women in the DFA have been allowed to get married to the man they wanted to marry from other countries. So, I'm like the godmother to all this, but I tell you, it took me 3 years. Why? There was discrimination in the DFA. They refused to put my name in the agenda to discuss. They wanted me just to resign. I said, why did you not make the men resign? There were 21 men, male officers, including the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, were married to foreign women, and yet they were allowed to remain in the service. Anyway, the convention to me is a very important document. Any woman in this world should read it. It took more than 5 years to cook it up. I remember the days when Ambassador Shahani would walk in the snow, lose her shoe, just to campaign for the adoption of the resolution in the United Nations. The second, of course, that's important is the Beijing Platform for Action. The Philippines was a very active participant. We chaired committees. Some of our colleagues, Ambassador Manalo was the chair of one of the committees. The former head of CHED, Pati Liquanan, was also chairing. And I'm saying this because to encourage our women diplomats to be more engaged in this gender discussion. The Beijing Platform for Action was an agreement. It is an agreement between the United Nations and national governments to adopt gender mainstreaming. You will hear this very often when you look at Philippine legal measures on gender mainstreaming. It stems from the Beijing Plan of Action. To mainstream into our national and regional and international policies what has been also in the convention and all the other agreements that have been reached within the United Nations body. For its part, to comply with the Beijing Platform Action, the Philippines committed the Philippine Plan for Responsive Development from the period 1995 to 2025. This is where you have the GAD legislation in the Philippines. What were the 3 goals of the Beijing Platform? That the country, the Philippines, the national authorities establish a mechanism or a structure for gender-responsive policy and program implementation. The GAD project is part of this, part and parcel of this goal. The second is to give attention to disadvantaged groups of women, namely victims of violence, armed conflict, sex workers, persons with disability, indigenous people, and migrants. And the third goal is to continue conscious raising advocacy and affirmative actions. In my case, I was really very keen to look at this Beijing Platform as well as the Magna Carta in order to perhaps strengthen the position of women in our national public and private experience. The third document is the Magna Carta for Women. Actually, it puts into law the provisions of the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination, all forms of discrimination against women. Can we just say CEDAW? Otherwise, I go, it's a tongue-twisting thing. Mina, if you don't mind, we just say CEDAW. Anyway, the Philippines like acronyms. Even if we don't understand, sometimes we use acronyms, but never mind. It's very strong, the Magna Carta is very strong on the legal instruments insofar as the labor code is concerned. I think this is, if you don't have the time to study the convention, to CEDAW, I suggest you study the Magna Carta because it's shorter and it gives you more or less detailed issues that need to be addressed in the Philippines. The fourth, I think, reading through and attending global meetings. I think the UN Sustainable Development Goals is another important document that we should all look into. Many times I just focus on agenda number 5, which is gender equality. And my position has always been that gender equality should be cross-cutting, whether it's health, whether it's environment, whether it's economic. Gender equality, to me, has to be, and I think we're doing this in the ASEAN context, cross-cutting within all the UN development goals. Now, a fifth measure came very recently last year when the United Nations declared June 24 as Women in Diplomacy Day around the world. Can you imagine? When this was declared, I asked the United Nations office in Manila to do something here at the DFA, but it was too late. What we did instead was to have a dialogue between our ASEAN women ambassadors and the EU ambassadors. We have been doing this with the EU, thank God for a very receptive head of the EU delegation in Manila. We've had about 4 dialogues between EU women ambassadors and Philippine and Asian women. The first one we inaugurated with a dialogue between our ambassador in Lisbon, Cookie Feria, and the ambassador in Berlin, Des de Vega. And they had a dialogue with 5 women ambassadors of the EU in Manila. It was terrific. We had a very good dialogue. I moderated it from Singapore because I got stuck in Singapore during the COVID. And anyway, today, it doesn't matter where you are. You can have a dialogue with anyone, and thank God. We didn't have this when we were our first days in the department. I don't know how many carbon paper you used, Mina, to draft that Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. There was no computer. So anyway, we are very lucky that we finally have it. Certainly, the Philippines can be considered as one of the countries with the most comprehensive policies on gender equality. I can give you a whole pamphlet. Read this. It's all the things that the Philippines has done for women. However, we are cautioned that while the country has made great strides in terms of policy and legislation, there are still areas of improvement, such as the expansion of numerous laws. If you read this, you will agonize looking at the list and you wonder what happened to them. The expansion of these laws, their strict implementation, and most importantly, the need for some kind of culture change. I remember again the comment of the United Nations official where she was implying the need for some kind of culture change in terms of national attitude towards women. Well, for my part, I have really never stopped working for women because of that experience of a discriminatory experience in the Department of Foreign Affairs. I have to admit, before I filed in my application to marry, I'd never felt anything that was discriminatory insofar as I was concerned. But the final test came when the man said, no, you cannot marry, you have to resign. That put me into 5th gear, if you look at if you're driving. As a diplomat, as I said, I've tried to keep on. Day after my retirement, I joined the private sector and tried to help in promoting our ranking in the global gender gap index. For this, I have initiated several platforms. One, I initiated the formation of the Filipina CEO Circle. When I retired, I opened a newspaper and saw that 4 women were heads of 4 car companies: BMW, Nissan, Hyundai, and Kia. I said, wow, not even in Germany were the women CEOs of car companies. So I said, I'll get these women together for lunch. It was a 4-hour lunch, and I said, ladies, nobody knows that there are 4 of you. If you bond together, perhaps we can make a statement. It was about 8 years ago. Today we have 62 women CEOs in the group, and we have been busy going around companies and schools saying, girls, you can start as a secretary and end up as a CEO. I started as a secretary. Anyway, it was a privileged secretary. I was a secretary, an appointment secretary to the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. That was just pure luck. And so, you never know. The second that I organized because I saw that a large number of underserved women are in the mountains. So I put together a Diwata, Women in Resource Development, and we made the mining companies pay for all the activities to improve the lives of women in the mountains. And if you're interested, you're welcome to visit my project in the Cordilleras and in Sierra Madre, where we provide solar lamps. And we send them to India due to friends, and they come back. There's a barefoot college in India. They come back. These are women, these are indigenous, illiterate grandmothers, which we send for training, and they come back being self-assured that they can make a solar lamp. It's a complete transformation. Of course, there are other things that I do, but I chair the Ministerial Roundtable of the Global Summit of Women. It's a 35-year-old, they call it the Davos for Women. And I chaired, for the past 15 years, the Ministerial Roundtable, where I try to bring outstanding Filipino women to be exposed at the global level. Last year, the first standing ovation that ever happened in a group of 1,000 women was for a woman who was heading GCash. Martha Sasson, who was one of my members of the Women CEO, made a fantastic report how GCash has helped not thousands, but millions of women get over their financial issues during the pandemic. And I think this is what her theme was, banking the unbankable. And GCash has made that possible. I'm not advertising GCash. I'm just saying that it was a terrific example of how women leadership can transform such a financial institution. And I brought other women leaders to global recognition. And so Martha now is so busy speaking to women's groups and how to bank the unbankable. I really don't know how it works, but it's good enough to know that there are such women who are such savvy in financial issues that it's wonderful to bring them to the consciousness of the world and the global community. Finally, I started by thanking FSI, and I will end up by thanking FSI again for an HRMO, for publishing our first Women in Diplomacy book. It was just by chance that I thought I'd do it, because in 2004, when I chaired the Security Council, and I was talking about women as peacemakers, et cetera, Kofi Annan said, "You know, I've been meeting wonderful, remarkable women ambassadors from the Philippines. Why don't you write about them?" I said, "Oh, yeah, okay." So when I came back, I asked FSI to make a list, and I was very impressed. We had, at that time, 90 women ambassadors in the Philippine Foreign Service from 1958. Who was the first woman ambassador? Anyway, you have a lot of homework. Today, do you know how many women ambassadors we have? Anybody from HRMO? 116. And I'm looking at my dear friend from Brunei. She was wonderful to give me immediately the list. You know, I like to compare. But for a young country like Brunei, I won't tell you how many, but it's a very impressive number. But nothing close to 115, 116. We're still the top in the region. The next one, I won't tell you what country. The next one is 57. The third one is 42, and then down the line. So I look forward, when this modest publication was made, people heard about it, and we have launched it. It was launched by the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee at that time, Ann Hofer, who brought it as her official gift to the countries, to the chair people of the country she visited. It's a very modest little book, but it documents who we are. And it's easy reading. It's 250 pages, so it's easy reading, and it documents what our foreign policy is, to give context, and what our women ambassadors did. And I'm very, very happy I did it, because it documented what one of our wonderful women diplomats did, who died in service, the first COVID victim, our ambassador to Lebanon, who wrote a wonderful article. She wrote about from cleaning glass windows to being a rock star. She was cleaning windows in Hong Kong, but in Lebanon, she was a rock star because the TV had her featured, and every time, it was a wonderful story. And when she passed away, we had her article published to make the public appreciate what our women diplomats go through in their job to become a good diplomat for the country. And I hope that, well, it's been launched in Germany, it's been launched in Portugal, it's been launched in Singapore, it's been launched in Vienna Institute for Diplomacy, and next month it will be launched again in Prague, in Bucharest and Budapest. So it has become a textbook, because there is no other reference book on the Philippines, on Philippine diplomacy. And we look forward to the second volume, and hopefully the third volume. And I hope that by that time, some of you would be in the third book or the third volume, and we look forward to that. Today, after this, I have to run away to accept my 5th presidential award from the President of Romania, because 50 years ago, I was in the team that opened our first diplomatic relations with the communist and socialist countries. It took 50 years for them to say, "Thanks, you did a good job." Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it's never too late. But my parting words would be for you to study what the country has done for the women, the convention, the Magna Carta, and all the other documents that we have been legislating. And I hope that you will keep the number of women in the Foreign Service. Do you know how many women are heading posts today? Ay naku. Out of the 60 posts, 44 are led by men and the rest by women. Something to think about. So ladies, it's never too late. Be on guard. Keep that spirit of service to the country. Our agenda is the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Albert, for your very insightful presentation. In the interest of time, we will open for one question from the floor. If there is anyone who wishes to ask their question, please proceed to the mic stand or raise your hand. Thank you.
The ambassador.
Good morning, Ambassador, Excellency. Thank you so much. I'm Marie Fontanelle, the French ambassador to the French Republic. I have a question. You mentioned areas of improvement on certain issues, and I have a question on one of them, sexual and reproductive rights. But first, if you allow me to share some views from being an ambassador myself from a country that decided to officially have a feminist foreign policy, feminist diplomacy. We are not the only one. You know, probably Sweden was the first one. And then some countries in Europe, like France, like Germany, like Spain, and other also countries in Latin America have decided to use this official feminist foreign policy that really helps us, I think, to stick to the agenda. We commit to, in every multilateral or bilateral occasion, to put women's rights very high on the agenda, and it's really helpful also on an internal point of view because it helps the foreign ministry to do its job. And in France, we have a lot of job to do. We are not there yet. It doesn't mean when you officially have a feminist foreign policy that you are better than the others. On the contrary, when I look at the World Forum Index, I'm afraid to see that France has declined and we deranked. So no, we have to take this with a lot of humility. But as I was wondering if the Philippines maybe was considering the possibility to join the club of these countries that have an official feminist foreign policy, since, yes, you are ranking very high on gender equality. But my question, to come back on that, of course, in our view, sexual and reproductive rights are an important aspect of gender equality. You might know that the French Congress has decided less than a month ago to enshrine in our constitution the right to abortion. I think we are the first country to do that. And we are feeling that we were obliged to take this step because of the backlash on women's rights all over the world, and particularly on sexual and reproductive rights. And we do consider that to be able to choose if we want or not to become a mother is an important aspect of gender equality. I know, of course, this is difficult. I mean, you have different views on this here in the Philippines, and I'm just wanting to hear from you, from your views. Do you see any? Is this a room? Is there a room for improvement on this? Was this part of the areas of improvement that you subtly mentioned in your speech? And thank you so much. It was really enlightening to hear from you, and congratulations for all the job that. Be sure that the rest of the world knows that we owe a lot, and women's rights owe a lot to the Philippines. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame l'Ambassadeur. When I read that France has legislated that abortion is allowed, I said, I'm sure a lot of people in the Philippines are looking at it. However, I will be realistic. Even divorce is not allowed in the Philippines. So that being the standard in terms of looking at changes, and the comment of the lady from the United Nations that there is so much left to be done, especially in terms of sexual violence and related illegal acts. Honestly, for the longest time, we have been, I'm part of some groups of women that have been working for legal separation or divorce. But the moment you say divorce in the Philippines, there are sectors that immediately go against it. And I think, again, what the UN lady said, it needs cultural change. It has to really be more looked into in depth. Although I must admit there are many couples, I mean not many, there are couples who separated without the divorce and puts a lot of the women in a very difficult situation because perhaps she doesn't get what she is supposed to get in a divorce settlement because there is no divorce, yeah, officially anyway. But you know people who have separated, who have remarried. I don't know if they have remarried, etc. It exists. But as far as a legal decision is made, I think if we have that situation with divorce, how much more for abortion? That's what I think. It's not what I believe in, but it's what I think in terms of the Philippine community, society is concerned. I would like to make a little naughty question. How many of you think that the law that does not allow divorce in the Philippines should be looked into and perhaps changed? Remember, we are the only country left in this planet that does not recognize divorce. So how many of you think we should? Higher. I think we should all go to Congress this afternoon. I think it will take some time. It will take some time. There are, my women's groups, we are all working for it. But it doesn't seem to make any dent so far as legislation is concerned. There are many interest groups that may be affected. But if, in terms of your question on abortion, I don't think perhaps within my lifetime, I don't know. But I would rather think that it needs a lot of discussion. Women's health is important. We are not very good in women's health, by the way, in terms of the demands of a very demanding profession. And among other things, they also look after the husbands in addition. But anyway, that being the case, I thank you very much, FSI, for all the things that you do and for our partnership in coming out with Volume 2. Abangan ang Volume 2 ng Women in Diplomacy. And hopefully may Volume 3 that might include you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Albert. At this point, I would now like to invite the Honorable Assistant Secretary Francisco Noel R. Fernandez III, Director General of the Foreign Service Institute, to present a certificate of appreciation and token to our speaker. Please allow me to read the citation. The Foreign Service Institute, Department of Foreign Affairs awards this certificate of appreciation to Ambassador Delia Domingo Albert for her invaluable service as speaker at the Mabini Dialogue Series, The Philippines at the Forefront Championing Gender and Development, given this 19th day of March 2024 at the Foreign Service Institute, Pasay City, Philippines. Signed, Assistant Secretary Francisco Noel R. Fernandez III. We'd like to invite our colleagues from the Diplomatic Corps and our retired Philippine ambassadors to join us for a photo in front.